Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and I'm joined as always with my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana.
Hey, everyone, it's me, Jackie, Jackie.
I think that's the Sesame Street intro you've been working
on
for a long time.
I think about 8 months. There it is.
It's a little jazzy. It might be more Electric Company than Sesame Street. No,
it's very 70s Sesame Street.
70s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yes. Well, hi, everybody. But this is sadly, if you tuned into this thinking this was a podcast about remembering everyone's Sesame Street songs, it's not. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles related to said topic. And since it's September, at least the time that this episode is coming out, it's September, it means we're doing an episode on supervision, because it's Supervision September. Hooray! Yay! There we go. Okay, thank you. Jeez, I'm waiting for all the cheers and sound effects.
And I hope that the Venn diagram between classic Sesame Street appreciators and our audience is pretty big. Overlap.
I don't know. I feel like we just assume these things based on our own age and what we remember. And if we all remember to look at
people have different experiences than us.
How many BCBAs just became a BCBA? You look at that exponential-ish graph. The odds that the people who just got certified in the past year that might be listening know about the 1970s at all is got to be pretty low.
Oh, that's disingenuous. Surely people do. Okay. Well, sorry, I interrupted your segue.
In any case, we do a lot of episodes in Supervision September on, being a good BCBA supervisor to your supervisee, to your trainee, and teaching them the ropes. But one of the things we don't always spend as much time talking about is the fact that once you've helped your supervisee become a BCBA, you still have to supervise other people, perhaps in an organization you work at. And while, you can sort of assume, well, I'm guessing it's the exact same thing, right? Well, there's a big difference between doing one-to-one or even small group supervision and continuing to use those same principles as a good supervisor in your organization of other BCBAs, BCABAs, RBTs. So we wanted to broaden our scope. And to do that, we're very excited to bring on as a special guest, Kim Heald, who's going to tell us all about supervision in that organizational context. So Kim, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, good. So we've got one article, one white paper we're going to be talking about. And then Kim was kind enough to send us a very fun activity that we're going to do later in the show, which we all were kind of blown away by. So we do want to make sure we spend some time talking about it. Listeners, we hope you'll enjoy that conversation. I think we're just going to see it as a chance to get free consultation and our supervision and work behaviors from Kim as well. So, we'll do double duty on that part of the show, I guess. But before we get into talking with Kim, Diana, what are those papers that we will be discussing today?
Sure. So we're going to center our discussion around two papers for today. The first is one that we have visited in the past, but that doesn't mean we can't circle back to it because it is a really good one. It's Recommended Practices for Individual Supervision of Aspiring Behavior Analysts. That's by Sellers, Valentino, and LeBlanc, basically the big three here in this area. That was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice in that awesome 2016 special issue. And then we're also going to be referencing something called the Predictive Index. And I guess the title of this client summary report, which came out in May 2020, was The Science Behind the Predictive Index Behavioral Assessment. And what all of that means will become clear later in the episode.
Okay. So, Kim, we would love to hear, and our listeners would love to hear a little bit more about yourself and how you got here in terms of, doing supervision at the organizational level and then wanting to talk about it with us on the show.
Absolutely. So my story is very similar to many that I have heard over the years. I've been in the field for about 24 years now. I was working on my undergrad and I'm looking to get into clinical and counseling psychology. I had an associate's in chemical dependency, and I got to my capstone class and realized it wasn't the direction I wanted to go in. It wasn't feeling right for me, but I was kind of speeding through everything. And I went and talked to one of my psych professors and just said, I don't know if I'm going down the right path here. And we talked for a little bit, and he said, I really feel like I should introduce you to a colleague of mine, John Moran. He's a local behavior analyst. He's been, working in the field of ABA. And the way he talked about it too is like, this thing called ABA. I don't know if you've heard of it. And it was not a degree at my school. Like, it wasn't something I could have taken classes on, but John was doing a intro class as an adjunct professor. And I went to just check it out. John is, I'm sure, most of us, right, have somebody in the field who was just our mentor, or, the person who just got us there, like really brought us into the field and made us really passionate about everything. And John was that person for me. Great person to listen to. He can inspire anybody. And he started talking about working with these little kids with autism, and you couldn't not be excited. So he started talking about how he was placing students for credits after training them to work with low-income families in the area who couldn't afford any specialized service, and going into the home or wherever the kids were and helping them out. So I started working with him, fell in love very quickly, and then ended up getting permission to do a bunch of independent studies under him for credits, and kind of just took my whole bachelor degree in a different direction. And then, of course, jumped into my master's and all that thereafter. Fast forwarding that so we both had our own private practices. And then in 2009, he was getting closer to retirement, and he had worked by himself, for himself, for several years and several decades. And he came to this realization that he wasn't going to be leaving anything in the field. And my husband, who's a forever entrepreneur, kept looking at us and saying, why aren't you guys starting something? There's so much need in the state. We're in New Hampshire. It's a very small state. There were no service providers, or very few service providers. Needs weren't being met. And John started getting on board because he felt like he wanted to leave something. So we merged our practices and started Constellations Behavioral Services. That was back in 2009. It started all as school consult. That's where a lot of our experience had been coming from. And then with some pushes with insurance reform, we jumped into the medical side also. So it's been a wild ride for anyone who's been a business owner. Everybody knows it's a lot of building the parachute after you've already jumped out of the plane. I'm sure you've heard it. So a lot of, Tim was the business finance guy and I was the clinical. And so it was not too long before I realized I really had to be supervising the people we are hiring and not just assuming everybody knows everything and throwing them everywhere.
You gave them the memo that said, do your job really well. And like, that should have done it. And okay, great.
Yeah, really easy
success.
Rules, I thought. So it was, building things by necessity. And then getting to the point where you're in that beautiful place where, now we can actually just invest, and really we've got the capital and the support for us to build this out in the way that we really want it to be built out, so that it's what I'll always say is the BACB can only move so fast to build the field up. So as business owners, we can and should be able to move faster within our own little realm of influence. So I like to try to be ahead of the BACB. So we've always put things in place about, when and where you can supervise. It's not right when you're certified, and it's different skill sets. So that's where the last several years I've been spending more of my time on training supervision layers, leadership, training, coaching. And I love that stuff. I love the kids with autism. That's how I fell into this field. But being able to inspire an up and coming BCBA or up and coming supervisor or a future leader is very exciting for me. I love it. That's where I love spending my time.
So Kim, when you're talking about the way that you need to do supervision, you're probably doing a little bit of that, maybe not as much, owning or being one of the co-owners of the company, as much of the sort of like brand new to the field supervision, but maybe you do a little bit of that. But you probably also have to do things like, I have to be a mentor for my people who've been here a while. I have to be a leader for the group, which might include people who aren't BCBAs. I mean, do you see a difference between those three terms other than, like looking at the BACB task list kind of way, or are they sort of all wrapped up with each other?
I think they're titles we use that everyone already has their own assumption around, right? So I think people use some of those interchangeably and maybe are miscommunicating. But I think in an ideal world, if we can kind of put a wrapper on all of those, I think there's a responsibility we all have, whether we're supervising someone to get their cert, supporting managing someone just post cert, or trying to move somebody advancing through their career and becoming a leader. I think there's a way to have regard to all of those pieces at the same time. I think that just takes a lot of work, a lot of practice, a lot of application, a lot of honest feedback. And I think that's probably where the hardest stuff comes in. I think when we talk about like supervision and management, sometimes there's a black and white have to. When we talk about leadership, we tend to talk a lot about inspiring and knowing where the ship is going. But to me, if a great manager has leadership skills, they're going to be more successful as a manager. But as we'll talk about in a little bit, we've used some tools that kind of help us better define and categorize that too for people, so we know where they have to work. I'm someone who I kind of struggle with black and white. I like to live in the gray. That's a place I'm very comfortable, where I think a lot of people prefer to live in a very black and white world. It's either a yes or a no. It's not a maybe. So I think learning some of those skills, no matter who you are, can be really beneficial, because people are complex and we're all different and we have a lot of different histories. So I think being able to shift and read the room and pivot when and where and how you need to is a really important skill, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of practice.
Yeah. So leadership's kind of like doing the really good TED Talk to get everyone jazzed. And then the supervision mentorship's kind of like, all right, now it's time for the workshop where we're actually going to do something.
Yeah. Yes. In that really nuts and bolts form. Sure. But I think you can have a great manager who might struggle with leading at times. And then you can have a great leader who, really maybe shouldn't be managing people all the time.
So, in your organization, what was sort of your goals in terms of setting up your supervision activities? And, as you sort of describe it, what were some of the reasons you wanted to do supervision that way? Maybe because you'd had bad supervision at other places you'd been, or in other tasks that you'd done. Yeah.
So everything for us is, we have a lot of tiered levels. In the grand scheme of things, our whole company and all positions have a gamified leveling system behind it. The most robust layer of that is actually at our RBT level, but it's existed at all of our levels for a long time. It's been refined over the years, mainly because as we've scaled, it looks different. Like job descriptions start looking different depending on how big you are. And I think this is something that's difficult for business owners or trainers when they have a smaller company and they build this system and then they're wondering why it's not working in a couple of years later, probably because roles and job descriptions and responsibilities have actually also shifted. So you need to change that as well. But we have at our BCBA level, we actually have that internally we use is an associate level, straight BCBA level, and then a senior level. And we don't expect somebody to pass their BCBA and then have every skill under the sun, clinically, nor within supervision or leadership. I think something we forget or nobody wants to talk about it, but the task list is in fact that baseline level. It's the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more under it. And you don't get everything just through going through your supervised experience, and you're not going to get everything because you're probably not in every setting. You're not with every kid and you're not with every type of staff. So we really treat that in that way. One of the books that we've read along the way is Leadership Pipeline. And Leadership Pipeline does a really nice job of explaining, we tend to, we're following this path, we want to move, everybody likes to move up the ladder, which I think is, sometimes harmful in some sense because everyone views progress as up. But as people progress through a job and they end up being promoted, they're usually promoted because they were the best at their existing job. Mm-hmm. And then when they get into that new position, they're now actually back quote unquote back to square one, because they're now doing something different and they have to gain those skills. And Leadership Pipeline talks a lot about how we can and should be putting things in place while they're in their existing jobs to allow for better skill building before the promotion period, which also allows for practice, application, feedback, and readiness. So if you're testing some of that and providing opportunity for people to experience some of those things with feedback before they're actually promoted, they can actually start in that new position with a better skill set under them. But I think we move through a lot of that too fast because we're in a competitive field, we're in a high burnout field, and people want to move up. And if they feel like they can't move up and they become certified and they know what their income potential is, if there's no reason to stay, they're going to go find the next best deal without realizing how overwhelming those positions might be in those first 6 to 12 months. So we scaffold everything and everything's leveled. So essentially a BCBA would have to earn their way through competencies and application with appropriate outcomes to be able to hit a point where we would even want them supervising other people, because you really need to get your own clinical practice down at least a little bit more before you're going to supervise others, especially others who may also be mentoring. Because they're going to ask hard questions. So we don't like to put everybody in that situation right away. So that's a huge part of what we've done. And how and why do we do that? Because we fell on our face a lot in the initial growth periods where it was like, well, you're in a good place. You're great at what you do. Go be autonomous while we go work on these other things over here to scale the company, and realize that people were ill-equipped in certain situations and that we needed to be providing them a lot more support.
So, and you mentioned, I think you said, did you say gamified? You have a gamified?
Yeah. So at our RBT level, it's a gamified system in that one, it has levels. So we kind of have 6 levels, one being just training and onboarding. And then there's a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through the RBT. Those are all competency based. As they gain those competencies, they level up. There's bonuses attached to leveling up, and those are overlaid as well with our wage bands and experience. So there's motivation to move up. There's also motivation to move up because it opens up promotion opportunity. So we prefer that someone's at least at a level 4, ideally a 5, before they would be interviewing for a tiered position where they're in more of we call it a peer coach, and we have a different title on our school side, but it's essentially the person right under the BCBA above the RBT. They're not supervising, but they're there to support the BCBAs. They help with some programming, they help with training, data, running groups, like all sorts of things. So there's motivation for people to want to keep moving up that leveling system. And obviously, simultaneously, they're becoming more competent, which means our clinical outcomes for the students with our higher competency-based staff are higher. And it took us a few years to be able to correlate all the data, but we've now been at a point where we can predict when we're going to have morale issues. We can predict when we're going to have staffing issues. We can predict when we're going to have some stalemate clinical outcomes with our students, all based on how people are promoted and moved through our system, because we do have our school-based branch. So a lot of promotions come in the summer leading into the fall. So our leveling graphs tend to take a hit when we go into the fall, and you can immediately see that on our clinical tracking. We tend to have, that's when everybody gets a little busy and stressed because there's a lot more new people in and a lot more training is happening. So you can see all that across all of our KPIs when you line them all up appropriately, which is hugely helpful because what we can do is we can proactively respond. So when we see those precursors in the data, we're able to say, all right, let's flood this particular unit with some more clinical support. Let's put in some more trainers. Let's proactively plan a PD day, whatever we might need to do to kind of get ahead of it. So that's hugely helpful with that system. And that, again, is replicated, but we haven't tested against it as robustly as we have at the RBT level, but we have that at the BCBA level as well.
Nice. And you said, just for listeners, KPI. Can you tell our listeners what that is? Because I know you know what it is, and I know. Not everyone,
knowledge, right?
Right. Yeah.
So KPIs, key performance indicators. So these are essentially, let's just say it's data, but it's our most critical data to say that we're healthy. So running an organization, a huge KPI is going to be our dosage. So we said we were going to give kids therapy. Are we giving that therapy? If we're giving the therapy, there's higher likelihood that they should be learning. We shouldn't have issues with insurance. We should see upticks in the assessments. Family should be happy. Referrals should be coming in, all those things. So it's the most important data that allows us to look at health. So we have a few that we look at our executive level, and then they're scaffolded down for, obviously BCBAs. Their most important KPIs are going to be the kids, the client's clinical data, but we have roll-ups all the way to our executive level to just make sure the company is healthy, safe, happy.
Okay.
Thanks. That's always helpful because I remember the first time someone's like, what are your KPIs? I'm like, Kit Kat, party.
Yep.
So I think one of the reasons it's always fun to come back to Sellers et al. 2016 is that was written at a very specific time for BCBAs. So if you're reading that then, you may have, maybe just done your 8-hour training, or you've only read supervision books because you sort of realized this isn't working for me and I got to do something. And so this is very new into when supervision was, hey, guess what? Supervision's a skill just like everything else. And I guess we need to make sure people know it. But, it's a bit of a dated article in some regards now, because some of the things being mentioned, like, hey, there's an 8-hour supervision course. Hey, everyone's got to do ongoing PD. All right, that's been happening for a while. That's not the new hotness. But I think the same principles, the 5 key principles, still are relevant. Really quickly, we can kind of remind everyone what the 5 are.
I'll tell you what they are.
Oh, thanks, Diana, because I was trying to find where they were in my notes.
Okay, so they are to establish effective supervisor-supervisee relationships. Number 1, establish structural approach with specific content and competencies. That's number 2. Evaluate the effects of supervision. Number 3. Incorporate ethics and professional development into supervision. Number 4. And then continue the relationship post-certification. That is number 5.
Yeah. And Kim, in hearing about your organization, like I heard a lot of those sort of coming in, maybe if not, said in the exact same, quote, but that those are part of your supervision. I'd love to sort of go through those and talking about your organization and sort of talk about which ones have you continued to apply perhaps in novel ways, or which ones do you say this doesn't matter anymore unless you're doing actual, your one-to-one supervisee kind of training. We don't really do that one as much, or it's not as big of a focus. So I think that'd be a really great way to sort of give some detail as to how some of those organizational tools you've developed have kind of come through over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like this, as I do about the task list, that again, like we've got to start somewhere. We've got to start breaking stuff down. We've got to give everyone a springboard. But then as we get into things, an 8-hour course on supervision, when some of it might even be about like the structure, like, the stuff that you can just read and you should be able to kind of follow that direction, right? That's kind of that's the easy part. The tough part is making all of this actually make sense and work. So where we've spent more time is when we talk about relationship rapport, this article, which again is great and breaks down a bunch of pieces of it, there's this really small section on, you've got to have a committed and positive relationship. That by itself is huge. And I think we've spent a lot more time there. And I think as a field, we need to be spending a lot more time there, which is why, Predictive Index is a tool that we've leveraged. But I think when you say that, I think any human would say, yeah, have a positive relationship with somebody you're working with. Like that sounds nice. We should all do that.
Just do your job, folks. Come on. What did you do this weekend? Don't care. Get back to work, right?
Just do your job. So
that's a great piece of feedback. Everyone loves hearing and then motivates
everybody wants to know what to do. And if it's do your job, then just do it. So I think when we talk about that, there is this general kind of assumption, do your job and then good things will happen. Not everybody saying everything comes across and is heard the same, right? So I might say something to one person and it lands and it works. And I might say the exact same thing in the exact same way to somebody else and it doesn't go anywhere. And I'm wondering what's going on. And again, that's because humans are complex and we come with histories of reinforcement. We come with previous experience. We come with different educational backgrounds. We come from different families who maybe, instill different skills or values in us. We have our own values. So all of those things can make that complex. And I think when we talk about that positive relationship, there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot more that I think we need to train people to be attentive to. And I think it's really easy for people to either get frustrated or defensive if something isn't working. And instead of asking ourselves, like, what are we doing to change? Because we're a part of that environment. So if we're the supervisor and the supervisee isn't picking up on something, what we try to train our team to think about is ask yourself first, what am I doing? And is there something I could do differently? And then let's look at the person, like what's driving them? Are they coming in contact with reinforcement? I think what's funny, and Rob, you kind of said it in the intro, we do all of this with ease with our clients, but then somehow when there's an adult we're working with, we throw our ABA principles right out the window and we're like, I don't know what's wrong. Like they should be doing their job. They should show up. They should do this. Why wouldn't they want to just do a good job? And we don't stop to say, well, maybe they're not coming in contact with reinforcement. Maybe the schedule's off. Maybe I thought I had a reinforcer. I thought they liked me. And I think we make these wild assumptions. We get all confused. So we spend a lot of time on the people aspect and developing that positive rapport. But we also recognize that not everyone is going to always be speaking the same language. And I don't literally mean, Spanish to English, but there are personality sets that may struggle at certain points. And then that means we have to have established a culture where it's okay to say, I don't really know, I don't understand what you're saying, or the way you're trying to train me isn't really working for me. Mm-hmm. But if people give that tough feedback, which I think is very hard, and I'm sure most of us, right, are working with a lot of new RBTs, young RBTs, people who may or may not have ever had a job much before at all, where they're not just learning about our science and our field and autism or whoever we're working with, they're also learning about what it is to work and have the responsibility and figure out how to pay their bills and health insurance. Do I need that? I don't know. So they're figuring out a lot of stuff, and we can't necessarily assume that we don't need to change our own behavior to buy them in and get them jazzed and sold. But we also have to recognize that might come with some tough feedback for us, so that we can pivot our behavior. And I think the minute people give tough feedback, if it's shut down, you really quickly have this culture where you can't speak your mind and ask for the right amount of help or the right kind of help. So that's huge. And I feel like there's so much more programming and practice that needs to happen there, but it's not really classroom stuff. Mm-hmm. You don't have a class about being human, because we kind of know all the rules, or, don't interrupt, be polite, ask someone if they understand, everybody knows those rules. It's more that we have to be watching our supervisors in action and help them understand where they may have not necessarily said something in a way that the person was receptive. Mm-hmm. So I think there needs to be a lot more on the job training and feedback and coaching around that stuff. And again, that culture of honesty and radical candor.
Yeah. Kim, how does that look in your organization? Because I'm guessing you on a daily basis aren't doing a lot of work directly with the RBTs, meaning that you've got multiple layers of people. So you might be able to do it with sort of your next level down folks in terms of modeling, coaching, but then how do you ensure that it continues to happen down the chain, other than like, well, I hope their supervisor did this too, and they're just already in a position to do it. And I'll just cross my fingers and take a look at the graph at the end of the year, and we'll see.
Yeah. Great question. So we have competencies at all of our layers, many of which, it sounds a little crazy to think that we would have a behavior skills training comp that we're still running on BCBAs, but we do. And that's because it looks different when you're mentoring versus when you're new and you're working with someone who maybe isn't even someone you supervise. Like we might be in a school we don't supervise them, but we're there to train them. There's still a BST component. And then when you're supervising people, then when you're supervising supervisors and so on and so forth. So it starts to look different. So we still run a lot of competencies on effective communication, BST at different levels, being able to read the room and handle a meeting appropriately. So kind of, knowing when to pause, when not to. And some of the stuff that we've started testing more robustly is a lot of what I like to call self-awareness assessments. So when we talk, and that kind of goes into, from the article section 3, we have to figure out how we're measuring effectiveness. Mm-hmm. So the effectiveness to us is going to come through a correspondence of a couple different areas. So one is going to be, are the kids learning, and do we have fidelity? So if we know we have great clinical outcomes, something's working, right? Like you can't necessarily say it was one person or anything, but we can say, well, this is an effective team. Their kids are learning, they're hitting their dosage, interfering behaviors are going down. So we've got the clinical outcome data. We've got our fidelity measure. So that's going to tell us if, people were trained to the point where everybody's doing the same thing. But we can and should also be taking other measures. And some of those are some are indirect and some are direct, but our client and parent and school district survey data, how are we doing? We will get feedback if somebody isn't getting along with somebody else, or they don't like their tone, or they don't think that they're getting enough robust information or training. So we need to do a pulse check on how people are feeling about our services. We also need to ask the people who are around them. So when we do reviews, we tend to do 360 reviews whenever we're doing a review. So anyone who might come in contact with that staff, whether they're an RBT or a BCBA or a coordinator, has the ability to participate in feedback to feed their performance reviews. And those are scored, and also with anecdotal feedback. And we also then have company-wide employee engagement surveys. And those are also coming off the Predictive Index. We use their platform for that. And that has 4 areas that are assessed, one being a manager score. So if we see all of that line up, we're happy. If we have great clinical outcomes, but people are saying, like, we don't really like you, we've got a problem, right?
Yeah.
Or if everybody loves us.
The medium face, not sad, but not happy.
We don't like those.
Is that how those reports come in? Because I'll get into business if I get smiley face, like reports like, profits are smiley face, but they're, the profits are sad face.
Nobody wants a sad face.
Okay, you know what, sad face.
Nobody wants a sad face. Yeah. So, but you have to line all those up. You could have a bunch of people saying, like, you guys are great. And I might be sitting there saying, yeah, but a whole bunch of our kids actually aren't learning right now. And I don't even know how you didn't notice that. So, or parents are happy, clinical outcomes are happening, but somehow staff are still leaving and not feeling supported. So if any one of those measures is off, it would be a red flag that would indicate something's off and we need to look at it. So we really like those to all sync up, and we're looking for that correspondence across all of those measures. And what we're doing a lot of testing on right now is doing some self-awareness assessments where people are scoring themselves on a bunch of leadership and managerial skills. There's supervisors then scoring it, and we're checking the IOA so that we can then open up that dialogue of, that's interesting, you viewed this skill as a strength. I would have actually labeled as a weakness. Let's talk about it. Where are you using this? Because we also can't watch people 100% of the time.
How creepy would that be?
It opens up the dialogue. Yeah. Would that be nice?
Yeah, I watched you all day today and all day
yesterday. Here I am.
My job is to watch just you.
Yeah.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey everybody, sorry to pause the conversation, but I wanted to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to our show, you're able to earn one learning credit, one supervision learning credit, I might say. All you need to do is finish listening to the show and then click on the link in the show description or go to abainsidetrack.com to find this episode and put in some key information, including 2 secret code words that were given to us by our fabulous guest, Kim Heald. And the first of those code words is stingray, STINGRAY. Is it a stingray like the animal or the car? You decide. Just make sure you write down stingray. Okay, and here we go back to our conversation with Kim Heald. So, Kim, it sounds like to some extent, that's speaking to the other, component of the sellers at all. That's sort of, you have to have a task list, like know what you're doing. But in terms of scaling it up, it's not going to be as easy as just pull the BACB task list for doing these, because that's only going to hit at the clinical measure. Right. You might get the ethics, the ethical measure as well. How does one scale a list of supervision activities, like a supervision task list that's going to go beyond, that one-to-one supervision? Is it more just, all right, I took what was useful from the BACB task list plus management books? Is there like a owner retreat you go to where they're like, here's the things you need to be looking at, and
there's this magical document somewhere at this workshop that you just, once you get a copy, you're done.
An entrepreneur, Well, we'll give you the secret list now.
So if it helps put a frame of reference around this, so this project of kind of scaffolding and leveling things all the way from onboarding as an RBT to running a branch has been a project that myself and a few other people have been working on for over 7 years. It isn't as simple as, order this book and everything will be outlined for you, because the reality is you have to also align that with our company, our job, like how we define all these positions. Some of it, I would say, just certainly could just pick up and work elsewhere, but not all of it. Like, some of it's really individualized. But how it was all scaffolded was we broke down all the skills that we felt were needed at all of these layers. It's this whole like narrowing down process. So here are all the skills. What buckets do these go in? Now are there duplicates? Let's get rid of some duplicates. And ultimately, we ended up with 4 different domains. One is clinical, which I think makes sense, right? Like we should be good at the science we're doing. One, which we've actually kind of pulled out and almost treated as its own now, is operational. And that to me is that like black and white managerial type roles. Like you have to respond to HR, you have to maintain your credential, you have to respond to emails, like the stuff that kind of everybody has to do in any job. We've pulled that out, that we kind of view that as just the have-tos. But somebody's executive functioning skills can sometimes make those easier or harder, which is indicative of them being successful in other positions. And then the other 2 are leadership and management. And we basically took all these skills, we categorized them into these 4 domains, and then we started looking at what portions of these skills are necessary for success at what layers. So something like communicating and coming to a compromise with a team, quite frankly, has to happen all the way down to an RBT. Like you don't have to wait until you're in leadership to be somebody who knows how to compromise. Mm-hmm. So that to me would be a leadership skill that is happens immediately. Like that's immediately viable and important for us to train as part of our culture immediately. Whereas being able to run an IEP meeting and identify who the key players are who are going to potentially impact your ability to get fidelity of programming and figuring out a way to pair with them and buy them into our science, I wouldn't necessarily expect an RBT to be sitting there trying to figure all that out. So we literally sat there and kind of had to ask that question at all the layers. And then over time, what we've done with everything is you always want to basically take that skill where it's the most important and push the training, learning, education, and requirement for doing it to at least one layer, if not two below it. So that when they are moving into that position, they are already now better equipped and have come in contact with reinforcement to shape and train and really allow that skill to be part of their everyday repertoire.
I love that.
So we try to push that down.
Can I ask you a question about that? Do you provide specific contracts that say those types of things on them? So, like with the BACB task list, you have to sign a contract with your supervisor. But for those that are not part of that, do you have like that type of outline and then a contract for them to sign?
We don't have a contract for them to sign for that. We have a contract at our mentoring level.
Right.
When they're going through their program, but we don't have a contract at the supervisory level. When they get their offer or promotion, like if it's somebody from the outside, offer letter, promotion, if they're internal, the job title, description, and responsibilities are in fact different though at those levels. So that's, if you want to say contracted, it's contracted in the signing of the offer letter and the job description. But I don't know if I like to call that a contract. Like it takes on some of those qualities, but we don't call it a contract.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was always wondering about that because I always recommend in classes that if you're not in the BACB, like you should then still establish some sort of agreement between you and your supervisor, and both of you should be on board with that, like after you've graduated, so that you know what their expectations are of you and they know what your expectations are of them. So I just wondered if that was something that you had formalized yet. I know that people keep talking about it, but that it hasn't like...
Yeah, that is not formalized in that sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really love the idea of when you said like we, identify skills that are going to be important and then we start building them in to whatever, skill building systems we have at a level or two before they're needed. That is so brilliant and so important. And that's what I talk to my students about a lot. I'm like, you could be the most amazing, RBT or teacher, whatever you want to call it. But very soon, very, very soon, you're flipping and then you're in the administrative and the supervisory role. And it's an entirely different skill set once you're over there. And on an added challenge often for folks is that they are then promoted within their organization. And now they're being expected to supervise their peers, who were previously, last week you were my peer and now I'm telling you what to do. And that is add just a whole other level, I think, of challenge to that supervisory position. But that's kind of a different point, I guess. But the speed with which folks suddenly need to be up to date in all of these, soft skills and compassionate skills that we're talking about as related to supervising someone is really surprising and I think really daunting for a lot of folks. So the more that you can make a plan like you're describing and build it in ahead of time and have it be something that is a lot more formalized and competency based as you grow within the organization is really going to benefit the structures and the people who are in that system.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So for example, our RBT level 5, that whole level is about passing competencies to train somebody else. They're still in an RBT position, but we're running comps on their ability to run BST and provide appropriate feedback for others who are training. Some people don't even want to go to the next level, but they're still motivated to get through that level because there's, bonuses and other things attached to it. But that allows them to really practice that skill before the heat's on, where it's more their responsibility and you take it more personally at that point too, when you don't feel that level of success and you're not coming in contact with that reinforcement.
Yeah. And to speak to the peer thing, if you have it built into the whole system, right? So people can expect that, as people are going to be observing one another and providing feedback as a means of their own training. Right. And this is part of the culture where we work. So they hopefully would be kind of more used to that as people get promoted.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Cool.
So I think really the only piece from the Sellers et al. Article we haven't really touched on would be that idea of how do we promote ethical decision making? And it's really easy, I think, when you're working with, your one-to-one supervision. You do a lot of ethical scenarios. Most of the folks have only been in the field long enough to know that ethics is a thing. They've read the list of, what are the ethical rules? But they're not really at a point where a lot of the gray of ethics comes into play. It's like, well, I'll be a good person and I probably will never have to respond to any of these problems ever again. But working in an organization that it takes on a whole new level in terms of just the number of ethical dilemmas you're going to face. Not all of them are ones that people can directly control. How do you continue to promote ethical decision making, following the ethical code in an organization as you get bigger, as you have multiple layers, as you have less and less direct impact on some of the people at some of those levels, being the owner, being the the level 5 RBT, being the mentor, BC, whichever role you're in. Like what has been your steps for kind of controlling for that? Or
Sure. So one, we kind of make it a norm that and it sounds weird saying it, but as people get ready to sit and when they're going through their mentoring, we kind of normalize that when you become a BCBA, you are likely to come in contact with a lot of ethical dilemmas that you may or may not even recognize, and you may or may not make the best choice, and that's okay. But you need to be communicating. You need to not be embarrassed or ashamed if you made a wrong choice or you suspect you made a wrong choice. Bring it forward. So immediately we need to know that we need to open up lines of communication, allow people to feel really safe saying, oh, I don't know if I did this right. We also want them to know that if we catch something, we let them know really quickly. The minute you have an ethical violation, the number of codes that it actually hits sometimes is shocking. So when we sit with somebody, we're like, hey, this happened, and I want you to know, this was attached to this code, but it's also relevant for these other 7. Yeah. And here's why and how. You're educating them with the circumstance that happened to them. So it's more, this I kind of equate to the science of consumer science. We know that emotion sells. Right? We know there's certain things that if we add a story to a lamp on eBay, it's going to sell for a lot more than just the lamp on eBay. So when you're sitting with someone and they may have had an ethical violation or misstep, and you're talking to them about a choice they made, that is related to their values. And they take it really, really seriously, but they also have to know that we're there supporting them through it and that it's okay. Most of us have probably messed up at some point in time, whether we were caught or not, or whether we recognize it is a whole other thing. So part of the reason we have the scaffolding and the levels is when you're first in that position, that BCBA position, you have a higher level of supervision. You have a denser schedule of supervision. You're required to pass in your written documentation. So you kind of have to earn your way out of a lot of those layers. And that allows us to catch those things faster. We also have clinical auditing systems at all of our layers. So there's a requirement for our leaders and coordinators to audit against their own system, pass that in, and there's somebody also checking intermittently on those. So we have the red flag system that's there in the background as a safety net, but we proactively put in the denser supervisory schedules and work checkpoints so that we can catch those things fast. And then just having that culture of it's okay to ask questions. It's okay if you made a mistake, bring it to our attention. We can help you move through it quicker. And we've had a lot of people that we've hired over the years from other places where they're with us for 2 weeks. And then we find out that they're involved in some ethical violation in a previous company. Mm-hmm. We still wrap ourselves right around them. And we're like, listen, we weren't there. It's not our agency, but here's the deal. Here's what you have to think about. Do you have anything documented? I don't think people realize how fast you can get in touch with the ABA ethics hotline. Yep. You're going to get a response inside 24 hours. I think people forget that there's resources out there to help us. Nobody wants to see us fail. There's a lot of supports there. I think people just need to be comfortable enough to reach out and ask for help.
Yeah. So Kim, I know this wasn't one of the questions that we sort of had on the potential list, but so much of what you have set up in your supervision and your scaling of supervision really has this amazing proactive component to it. And ideally, I think anyone who's listening to this, who's worked with you, sort of can now continue using that in their own practice going forward. But realistically, how many of these sort of proactive steps did you have day one? Or which were the ones that you were like, I got this one was there? And which ones were sort of the, good, I'm glad no one noticed. Oh, let me make sure that never happens again.
I'm going to take a wild stab and say 0% were in day one. If I had to just like throw it out there and guess. Yeah, zero. I think, this is where, when I get my time machine up and running, I mean, besides making all the money, of course, Monday morning quarterbacking, right? Like, I mean, so many lessons learned. I really do feel like it was a lot of falling on our face, but falling on my face, what's going on? Why is this not working? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I had to learn to really humble myself along the way too, and realize like I am also drinking through a fire hose right now, trying to figure out how to scale this company, put those systems in, while just doing the day-to-day stuff that has to happen. It's a lot, and it's a lot for everybody involved, though. It's not just a lot for me. It's a lot for the people experiencing it. And it's taken a long time to get all that. And I think when people are first starting, whether they're running their own business or just responsible for a lot of portions of the business they're in, there's kind of always too much to do. And you have to figure out where to spend your time. And you also have to figure out, do I have the financial resources to put some of these things in place at certain points in time? And so there's times where I've said, like, even if I had my time machine, I went back, I don't know if my decision would have been any faster or better, because I might not have had the money at that point in time to put some certain layers in. Mm-hmm. So is that right, wrong, or indifferent? I don't know. But I would venture a guess that just literally almost none of this was purely proactively put in place at the beginning. The way we started was hiring like-minded people who had similar philosophies and values to us, who were jazzed working together. Our culture was the same quickly. And then it was, quite frankly, coming in contact with some punishment here and there to say like, oh, oops, that didn't work, and why? Mm-hmm. So I think you always have to ask yourself, what's the root cause here? And I think when we talk about kids, we're talking about the function of behavior. We still need to be talking about the function of behavior at our level. I tend to say root cause rather than function, but I think we need to be thinking about those things. Like, why did this happen? And it's usually not one thing, right? It's usually a whole bunch of things you have to fix. But none of this was in place day one. That I'd be lying through my teeth.
That makes everyone feel so much better. Everyone's just like made a collective sigh of relief if they've been holding it in. They're like, I'm going to start my new business. Nope. I'm not, because I have nothing together, but now you've helped everyone.
You've modeled that vulnerability as a leader that all the books say you need to be able to do. So well done, Kim. Good job.
Yeah. Yay. Vulnerability. And I think vulnerability is something that not everybody's comfortable with, right? Like, and what I've said to a lot of our leaders that we're training is we train consultants to kind of carry themselves with a level of I'm the expert. So because we want them to understand, like you can't walk in and be like, oh, I don't know. Like, you're being paid for your opinion. So I think we spend so much time shaping confidence that then we forget sometimes it can go in the opposite direction, or we've inadvertently scared them away from saying, I don't know. Mm-hmm. My rule of thumb is, if you're going to say, I don't know, which you can and should say sometimes, because there's no way you know everything, confidently say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. What a great question. I'm going to go look into it, or I'm going to call my supervisor. Model that out loud, both for yourself. And then what's anybody going to say? I mean, that's not bad. Like, nobody's offended at that point. Like, even if you're a school district, you're like, oh, thanks for being honest. I'm glad you're going to go get an answer for us. It kind of takes the wind out of anybody's sail to be upset. And it shows ownership. It shows, I guess you could say it shows some vulnerability, but it also just shows like nobody knows everything. And we do need to work. We do need to work together. We need to go to the research, but we also need to use our colleagues. We need to go to the experts. And our field is still small. So, I mean, it's just as much as we can reach out and hear from Bailey, we have so many people who will reach out to just any expert in our field, and they're more than happy to get on the phone and talk about the things they're great at. What a compliment, right? So there are so many experts that we can be tapping into just even within our own field, and we should. That's how we're going to protect ourselves.
Good advice.
Yeah. All right. So, Kim, I know you were very jazzed to talk about something that you've added to your leadership and supervision, and that's the predictive index behavior assessment, which I read the white paper. You were kind enough to send us the actual little assessment so we could see it for ourselves, because reading this sounded like this sounds like some sort of early 20th century predictive buzzword personality test. Like, I could take this on the internet in 5 seconds, and what Hogwarts house will I go to? Who cares? Like, what? Where did this come from? I mean, and it has research. Like, you sent us the white paper. Where did this come from? And then why did you decide this is going to be useful for my organization?
So this was a program that was recommended to us by a previous employee who was both consulting and advising and working with us on our operations side. He had used the system in a previous industry. And this is not an industry-specific program, so they work with any industry. Right. It is based on behavioral science, decades worth of researching people's behavior and work behavior and all those things. And what he had said was, when we started working together, one of the things that I had been spending a lot of time looking at was our exit interviews. And one of the things our exit interviews were telling us was that we were losing, at the time when I did the analysis, nearly 60% of the people who left our agency left because of, quote, bad fit. And when I started diving into the anecdotal information, that is both a pro and a con, but when I started diving into that, like, okay, why not a good fit? There were kind of a host of things that would go under there, like the intensity level of what we have to do. Like, we're working with these high needs kids, plus we have data, plus these concrete, programs we have to run. Sometimes it was just, special needs in general. This isn't for me. It doesn't feel good. Sometimes it was the fast pace. Sometimes it was, there's all these competencies and just it's too much for me to handle. Sometimes it was just the layer of complexity, remembering all of this, like not wanting to kind of have to feel like you were going to the job aids. But there were all these little themes popping up, and they ultimately came into this place of like not a good fit. And what he had said to me is, if you're losing people to not a good fit, maybe they weren't a good hire in the first place. And so he introduced the predictive index. I hooked up to do basically the sales calls. And one of the big areas that this is used in is you can use that platform to design under these drives and domains that you saw in the article. You can design where you need somebody to fall based on the job description and the responsibilities within that job. So, for example, if you're going to go into sales and you're really not a people person, you don't like to chit chat, people isn't your thing, there's probably going to be a disconnect with your job description to what you're comfortable doing. Does that mean you can't do it? Nope. Like, we're behavior analysts. We know we can train behavior. But does it mean it's going to be harder, take more coaching, take more supervision, take more support? Yes. And does it mean it could be more energy sapping for you? Yes. So as you figure out these roles and you come up with these profiles of what you're looking for, you can essentially have somebody take this assessment, and then they get a score for being how strong or weak that matches to their profile and the job that they need to do. Does that mean we wouldn't hire someone who doesn't have, like a really high matching score? No, because just like an FBA, it's just one piece of the pie, but it gives us indication where they might struggle. It gives us indication where they might need training. It gives us indication where the manager might want to change how they're presenting things, setting them up for things, or how they're training. So it allows us to make smarter choices for hiring and promotion because we can match to what we know they're going to need to do. Mm-hmm. So that was where it started. Where I think we've had the biggest bang for our buck, though, is that we've used it for coaching people within these interpersonal relationships. So if someone's struggling, probably like one of the best concrete examples I had was when we first started rolling out the program. I had a coordinator call me and said, can I troubleshoot with you? I'm having a really tough time with one of my supervisees who's also my mentee. And I just feel like I'm saying stuff. She seems to understand. I know she's brilliant, but we're just not jiving. I don't feel like I'm supporting her. I want to support her. I would guess she would say the same thing. What I knew at the time too, is that the mentee had asked for a different mentor. But I met with a coordinator. We popped up the profiles, and there was a particular area in this person's profile that would indicate that they would be somebody who would be very high likelihood that they would freeze under pressure. And so I started talking to the coordinator about that. And I said, so I'm seeing on the graph that this is someone who might freeze when they're under pressure and they probably have struggle with prioritization. And she said, oh my gosh, now that we're talking about this kind of makes sense, because she has all these things she's trying to do. And every time I come back, I feel like all of them are a little bit done and nothing's fully done. And I said, well, she probably doesn't even know what the most important thing is. Like, she probably hasn't figured out how to do that, and you have to train it. So she went back and started training the skill of learning how to prioritize. And why? Like, why would we prioritize this program over this, or this training over writing this BSP or whatever? And 3 weeks later, the mentee had pulled back her request for a new mentor. The coordinator called me and said, that was amazing. Her and I are on the same page. We've now opened up lines of communication where we can be really honest with each other. She's also become more aware that she freezes under pressure. Like, she was really not aware that she was freezing under pressure. That little exchange completely changed that relationship between them. It changed their supervisory relationship. It changed the way they were communicating. It changed what they were owning. It changed what the coordinator was focusing on for education and training. And it focused where she was going to reinforce as well. 3 weeks totally changed their relationship.
Wow.
So those types of examples, I could give you lots of examples, but those were the things that we started seeing, is that this isn't even just good on the recruiting side. This is a really huge managerial tool, particularly for people who struggle a little bit more with the social aspect. Like, there's some people who are just like, listen, I do want you to just get the job done. Like, I don't want to chit chat. So it can help there. It can also help for your chit chatters who might realize, hey, I'm chit chatting away and I didn't realize I'm kind of ticking you off. Like, you can't even process because I'm chit chatting too much. So it's really allowed for just some better awareness all around. And we've seen some really beautiful relationships and supervision and mentoring and coaching come out of that in a really positive way, which has been huge.
So you sent us
very cool.
You sent us the test. It is all the white paper's like, take 6 minutes, Yep. It did.
Literally did.
It took no time at all.
Yep.
It was all online, and the white paper talks a lot about how, none of it's a bunch of adjectives. You're clicking a bunch of adjectives and answering 2 questions. None of them are meant to be above, I think, what are they, like an 8 or 9 year old reading level. So you could use it with almost any employee across. And it's, you could take it when you want, in a comfortable place. So you've got your question about how do you think you should act at work, which is that self-concept domain is what the white paper will say. And you click a bunch of adjectives. This is how I'm supposed to be at work. Then you have the question, well, describe yourself. Like, which adjectives describe you? The self domain, right? And so you click a bunch of adjectives. This is what I think I am. And then it comes up with, it averages them all to make the synthesis domain, right? Which is sort of like, this is likely what is going on at work. And it sort of breaks down your scores across these factors of dominance, extroversion, patience, formality, and objectivity. And it's just you. It's not like, most people are this, therefore you're bad and should get. And then it gives you this great little report that's like, this is your category, which does feel a little like a BuzzFeed quiz at first. Had a little picture next to it too. It was really cute. And then knowing this, these are probably the things that you like at work. These are probably the things that you might not do at work. And here are some things that someone working with you might want to know about you, which I think, like you were saying, really did reading it lend itself to, so these are the things that, you might want to not hire me for if there are other indicators too, that you're like, I'm iffy about this person, and knowing blank, we need someone who can already do that. Or this person's so good, but I know this is going to be an area where I need to do more mentorship or do a professional development with them, or supervise them more closely, or put them on a team that I know, it has the same types of scores and won't care about the, chit chat or whatnot.
Yep.
And basically our results, for listeners of the podcast, you will probably not be surprised that the results were Jackie and Diana were smart and collaborative, and Rob was a big, loud, bossy jerk was my score.
A big, loud, bossy jerk.
It just said do not hire on my test. I was a little surprised.
See, I'm seeing innovative, out-of-the-box thinker, fast mover and shaker.
The big, loud, and then sometimes jerky. But no, I was a maverick, which I like. I appreciate it was a maverick. And a little plane right next to it too to let me know.
And I will say, so we have a consultant who works with us, Laura from Lead Shift. So they are a consultant that works with the software. She's been phenomenal. I'd be happy to give her information to anybody who's interested in talking to her. But she's the one that trained me to, how to move through this and read all this. One of the most important things she said to me that when we do any training here, I say it immediately. I think it was the best thing she said to me is people get all excited to find out the name, like the title, like, oh, what are you? Like, and you, this is what we like to do, right? Like we like to belong. We like to, where are we? She said, when you're teaching people about this though, forget all that. Just look at the graph. And like, we're in a science where we like graphs, right? So what I've told people is like, the more I've learned about the system, the more I don't necessarily worry about their title. I more think, are they a high A? Are they a low B? Are they so those where the graph shows those patterns and how high or low they are within these statistical differences is actually more valuable to what I'm going to do or change about myself and how I'm interacting than the title. Like I think we kind of get stuck in that a little bit. I always say like, don't worry about that. It's cute and it's fun and we work with it, but worry about the graph. And there isn't a good or bad profile, right? Like it's all just, it is what it is. We also very much say to people when we do this, and then they share, this is my profile and this is, what I think really does pertain to me. And this is the part of my profile that I don't know if I agree with. It allows people to, again, open up that dialogue. It allows for self-awareness. It allows for some ownership. It allows for communication. It allows for an easy way for people to communicate what they need or disagree with. And I think sometimes, there might be portions somebody disagrees with, but then sometimes there's an opportunity for us to say, well, you said you disagreed with this, but actually this example would indicate it's spot on. And so then it just further increases their awareness. You have to be careful not to use it as an excuse either. Like there was a point where I was saying like, well, you guys know me, I move so fast. Well, I can't use that as an excuse.
Well, you could, but your employees might then, be like, all right, you know what? No thanks.
You guys know I can't prioritize, so don't expect me to. So we can still learn these skills. What's important though is that, again, certain things are going to be more energy sapping. So even if you have the skill, like I know how to be an organized person, and I know that sometimes it's better if I move slow. That doesn't mean I like it, and that doesn't mean that when I'm trying to do it, I'm not using every ounce of my energy to not have really impulsive responses. So I think being aware of that allows for the people around me to know, one, what they should hold me accountable to. So my team knows it's okay for them to cue me if I'm moving too fast because I'm not going to be offended. I'm like, yeah, I do that sometimes. So I think for me, it's a lot about that opening up doors for better communication. And I think that's where the conversation kind of has to start. So it very much helps with that.
So the graph that was produced, there were a couple. There was one in sort of the longer report. And by longer, it wasn't that much longer. It was a very easy to read report. But the graph sort of had like a triangle, the x-axis, you got like the triangle on the bottom, which is sort of, your how much towards each of these four, skill, the dominance, extroversion, patience, formality they went. And then it also, I found very helpful. It didn't have a y-axis, but it just had sort of some phrases that let you know, this is probably what you would, like this person wants, or at least one of the graphs, how to interact. I love this. How to interact with Rob Perry Cruz. But then Diana and Jackie have one too. Now, and Kim, you'd mentioned kind of when we were first kind of chatting over email about these results, that the category might be less useful because even if you get the same category, so both Jackie and Diana were in the collaborative category, they're collaborators category, but they don't have the exact same graph.
So all of this is based on the statistical math behind where those drives fall to be put in a category. But this is where I think it helps people just for a visual, because we're talking, this is auditory for everybody listening. When you're thinking about the profiles, picture a map of a neighborhood, and there's a whole bunch of different neighborhoods. So we've got our collaborators, we've got our mavericks, I'm a venturer. All of these neighborhoods exist. Some are bigger than others. So the collaborator profile itself is a bigger profile. Like there's more of the population is going to statistically be in that category, where a strategist, for example, tends to be a smaller neighborhood. It's all about the math behind it. So you're going to see some similarities with those profiles. The point of predictive index is that it puts, for me as a supervisor or a peer or whoever, right, it allows me to get into the neighborhood. But once I'm in the neighborhood, as we know with everybody, right, what street you live on, what house you're in, how your house is set up, every little bit of that gives you more and more and more information about a person. Those are all the other pieces, right? So our history of reinforcement, the education we've had, our upbringing, all these things are other pieces of the puzzle that allow, this person to be who they are at this present moment. This is just getting people into neighborhoods. And then you've got to do more work. But I think getting in the neighborhood helps. It helps a lot with communication, being prepared, refraining or purposely doing certain things at certain points in time to allow better support for a person. For example, when I was running our clinical support team a couple years back, there was a point where one of my peers, I have a similar profile to you, Rob. I'm a venturer. I move fast. I think fast. I'm usually 10 miles down the road when everybody else is thinking about getting in the car. One of my peers reached out to me and said, whenever we have a meeting, you often put a brainstorming thing on there. There's something we're going to be brainstorming. And I see the agenda in the morning before the meeting, but I don't actually have any time to process. So I don't tend to participate in these brainstorms because I need to know that, I would be able to participate better if you told me a couple days in advance. The rest of us on the team happen to have profiles where we think on our feet and we process out loud. Mm-hmm. Where she was someone who processes more quietly and internally and with time. So
you fired her because just what?
So I got rid of her. So you don't fit in this group. We need to move fast. No. So she shaped my behavior. I started sending the agenda a couple days in advance, which quite frankly was a good skill for me because I should be sending the agenda a couple days in advance. Why am I sending it the morning of when the meeting's in 2 hours? Then nobody can prepare. So that was a good skill for me to have, but she felt safe, comfortable saying that to me. She became a totally different participant in these meetings, and I need her opinion because she thinks differently than some of us.
Yeah.
So little things like that are where we're seeing these breakthroughs that have a lot of rapport building and comfort and that psychological safety that I think a lot of people are talking about now.
Yeah, and this definitely does lend itself to that idea, I think, like you were saying, Kim, of that neighborhood of, you're not going to read this report and be like, oh, now I have the answers to all of my problems.
Right.
But when you're predicting or when you're planning, knowing your groups or knowing some of this information, you can either think ahead or you can use this as people are saying, hey, this is a concern I'm having, to say, okay, what might be a good way to sort of dive into some of this information in terms of actionable steps? So even though I know some people might be hearing this and be like, dominance, actually, those are great terms. Come on, those are labels. I don't like that. That's not behavioral. That's not observable. To some extent, it's irrelevant because it's just kind of giving you that idea of what might this then look like as behavior, and therefore what might need to be changed, or what might increase the response effort for some of the initiatives we're doing, and therefore we need to go slower. So there are a lot of things you can get from this. Otherwise, at first sight, this is I'm a Ravenclaw kind of quiz. It's sort of how it, and then when it takes 6 minutes, you're like, there's no way this means anything.
But like Kim said too, the way in which you respond to this is related to your own personal history of reinforcement coming into your current work situation. So Jackie and I have very similar maps here, right? And I think part of that is related to who we are, but we also share.
You've been friends for so long because your maps are so close, perhaps.
Maybe. But we share a huge history related to our work upbringing as well, right, Jackie?
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
if there's an issue at work, half the time Jackie and I don't even need to like talk about it. We just we open our mouths and the other one goes, yep. And like we've resolved the issue. So part of that may be that we happen to map on, and that's why we work well together. But part of why we work well together may be due to our shared history of reinforcement and the values that we know we both share.
Absolutely. And I think, so Alyssa, who's our first employee in the company, she's still with us now. She's been through everything with us. She's helped us build the company. Her and I laugh now because we're like, if only we had these stupid graphs a long time ago, like we would have figured this all out. But her and I can read each other so well now. It doesn't, like, we don't need this. Like, we could have probably drawn each other's graphs. But rewind the clock, had we kind of understood how her and I were viewing things slightly differently and needed to approach information and problems, we probably wouldn't have ticked each other off when we were first forming that relationship and learning each other. So, as a human, right, like, we're still coming in contact with reinforcement or punishment to shape our behavior over time. This is almost just something that allows us to move a little faster because it allows us some information, some insight as to what may or may not be high or low probability. What's important on any of these graphs, and all three of you, interestingly, so like the more spread you have in these graphs, so the more a drive is going to be like way over in like the third standard deviation, and then on the low side and the second standard deviation, the more spread you have, the more you're going to see some of those traits come out more, I'll say more consistently or more maybe loudly. Whereas if all of those drives are closer to the midline, that's when they're a little bit more environmentally driven. So if you had, like, if your social drive is like right on the border of being 0, that means that there might be circumstances where you're like a really social person. You like to talk, be loud, do your thing, socialize, have a bunch of people around you. Then there might be totally other environments where you're like, no thanks, I'm going to be in the corner, don't talk to me. So when you that just adds to this complexity, but that's what we're good at. We're BCBs. We're used to looking at the environment and looking at all these contingencies to figure out what we need to change, what's best, when and where something might happen because of certain contingencies. But you're going to see some of these traits come out more so the further away they are from the 0 line. And that's, the more you learn about that, the easier all this becomes too. But to answer the question from before, how do we look at this? Well, again, we're BCBA. So what we've done is we've said, like, when we talk about like dominance, which again sounds like a weird word, and when you say like independent versus collaborative, well, does that mean if I have a high A, I'm not somebody who can collaborate with people? No. We've kind of given examples of observable behaviors that would fall in these categories so that people can understand these traits a little bit better. And then we've assigned ABA methodologies that tend to better train some of these things. So Jackie and Diana, you guys have a higher C. High Cs tend to have trouble with prioritization sometimes. The reason they have trouble with prioritization is because everything's important. And everything's important because stability in the environment so that people could be successful is hugely valuable to both of you. But when everything's important, no one thing is important at any given point in time. And so you might, again, be doing a lot of things, but not necessarily doing one thing to completion or the same thing that maybe Rob would be interested in working on. Yeah. So that just means you guys need to talk about it. But as your supervisor, if I know that I might want a goal around prioritization and understanding that as a skill and how it relates to your specific job and what you need to be doing. So it helps with the goal setting and again, helps with that reinforcement. I don't need to reinforce something you've been doing forever and do naturally. Like that, that's great. It's probably under natural contingencies at this point. Yeah. But I do need to work on that. But no one profile is better or worse than another, right? Like, we all have things.
No. I don't know. I was pretty happy with mine. It definitely made me feel, yep, that's good. I mean, I guess I took the test,
very accurate.
So I could have made up my own answers, I suppose.
Yeah. And Rob, you made an interesting comment. Like, does this mean nobody wants to work with me? For you, you actually have a high B, though. You have a high social extroversion score. That would indicate, though, that you are very, very good at people. You can read a room. You know perspective. Whether you're moving fast or slow, you probably know, like, I'm moving too fast for this person because you can read the people really quickly. So it's not at all that you're not a difficult person to work with. It just means you might work with somebody differently than Diana will. That's not right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just what's the circumstance and what needs to happen. There are times where and we all know this, right, in a job, there's times where we have to move fast. There's time where we have to go slower. If we need to go slower, nobody's asking me to help. Like I know that about myself. But if we need to move a little quicker, I'm somebody they might call. Mm-hmm. That helps with teams. It helps with projects. Everybody who works with me knows I need somebody with a high C to help me get my crap done. Like I need somebody to hold me accountable. I very much know that about myself. I always assign accountability coaches. I always ask for deadlines. I just know I need to monitor that. But that, if I'm monitoring it, great. Yeah. It's more energy sapping for me.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I'm always the detail person. I'm the cleanup crew.
Yeah, you're way on the C detail. Well, Kim, this is so fascinating to look. I'm so glad you sent us the test, because just reading the white paper was interesting, but I don't think it really made it.
For our listeners, you have to get a subscription.
You
or
have to.
Something.
You have to do the test. I think when you do the test, it makes it real.
It does seem like a very useful tool for your agency.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a good point where we should move into this dissemination station.
Yeah. Jeez.
There we go.
So the what's next? What do we need to do type of thing?
Yeah. Or if someone's listening and they say, all right, I'm ready to be the best supervisor of all time, recognizing that they probably can't be like, and tomorrow I'll open a business with 500 people and all of this will be in place and we'll be ready to go. I'll get my PI subscription set. I'll know all this stuff with graphs everywhere of everyone's skills. So, you can find your team. Right? Probably not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen.
Where would you suggest, Kim? And again, I know you're talking to lots of people who are going to be at various levels of supervision in their organization. Yeah. But in terms of helping yourself, helping your organization improve its overall supervision capacity, capabilities, what would you suggest is sort of a good kind of next step for most people? Maybe not if for everybody.
I think for most people, the one thing that I think we all need to be really focusing on is, just because we're certified or just because we have a title doesn't mean that we're fully capable, comfortable, or competent yet. And that's okay. But it does mean that we should be asking for help. And it does mean, as supervisors, whether we're a director overseeing a whole unit or a supervisor with one RBT, we need to be providing more coaching and BST at all layers. We can't just leave people out there and assume you were promoted because you're great, so go continue doing great things. We still need to be there. We need to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, have resources. We also need to stop pretending that we can just train all this by, having them read a leadership book and do a PowerPoint presentation on soft skills. It's kind of the exact opposite of what soft skills are, right? We need to be with them in the settings and do on-the-job training and reinforce those amazing things that they're doing, shape the things that they need to continue to refine, bring their awareness to the things that they may not be paying attention to. And it's different for different people. Even somebody with great social skills, that doesn't mean that they're not realizing that maybe they're being too socially dominant and nobody else is talking. There's so many aspects to this. So I think we need to remember that we need to be doing on-the-job training just as we would if we were training a new RBT with a student or a parent to work with their kid at home, toilet training. We need to be there. We need to be giving them that feedback and helping them come in contact with reinforcement and correction where appropriate. So I think that's where I would be spending more time. I think and the board will end up moving in this direction. It's just a matter of when can they. I think, and we're seeing some steps in that direction now, but I in some sense, I guess I would hope that our field looks similar to that of going into a medical field where you're in your apprenticeship or fellowship for a couple of years. You're not practicing on your own. You've got somebody with you. The field will do that when the field has enough people to do that. They can't do that. They can't do it right now. But again, within our own organizations, we can. So I think knowing that it's okay for us to have these in-between layers where it's you're not on your own yet. You are an apprentice and and I'm doing this to protect you and help you continue to grow. It's not meant to be a punishment. It's meant to be supportive.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on today and talking so much about supervision, for sending us these awesome tests to try out. If folks wanted to reach out because they're like, yeah, everything Kim said was awesome, but I'm the boss of an organization and I want some more specific questions about how this implemented or how you implement it. Is there a place that folks can find you online or get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and my email, which I can give you if you want to put in any show notes or anything, kim@constellationsbehavioral.com. It's long, but it's there. Happy for anybody to reach out. I think the field needs to support the field. Like we're growing fast. And as you said, most people coming out are young and haven't been in the field for too long. That's not a bad thing, but it's also just a fact. So yeah, I think anybody's more than welcome to reach out. I'm happy to talk to them about any of this. And obviously there's a lot more detail behind all of it. But yeah, happy for anybody to reach out at any point.
Huge thanks once again for Kim Heald for coming on the show and talking all about scaling supervision for your organization. I think we all learned a lot and we had a ton of fun looking at our PI behavior assessments as well. So now that we are at the end of the show, let's go to the last segment, pairings. So Dinah, what are our pairings for this episode?
All right. If you enjoy listening to this, and we have lots and lots of other episodes that you can go back and listen to. We have every, what month is it? September. We do supervision. We do 3 or sometimes 4 supervision episodes.
Many years too now.
Yeah. So if you need those, you can go back, and that's a whole section on the website. But more specific to this topic, I pulled out a few that I think you might like. So episode 64 is one in which we discuss supervision pitfalls. Episode 76 is the one where we talk about gamification. So if you were intrigued by that, you could go check out that episode. In episode 98, we talk about staff burnout. In episode 139, we talk about navigating supervision in the public school. That was actually an episode that we recorded with GBABA, which is Greater Boston ABA Conference, but they allowed us to release it on our website as well, so you can check that out. If you're looking for ethics or supervision, then you can check out episode 179, which is the ethics of supervision. And if you need an ethics episode credit, you could listen to 180, where we talk with Dr. Manny Rodriguez about promoting ethical leadership. And only 2 more to go. Episode 199 was about preventing burnout and job crafting. That was with Dr. Julie Sloviak. And then finally, episode 221 is where we discuss tracker training with Ryan Atkinson. Any of those
fun
might be of interest to you. And then, as always, I recommend a snack to enjoy eating while you listen to some or all of these episodes. This is a hearty snack, so you might actually get, a couple episodes in while you listen. So the snack is in honor of our Predictive Index profiles. So the first part of the snack is the Maverick, and that's going to be a steak.
Oh, that's nice.
Cooked to your liking. I assume, Rob, that would be medium rare.
Is that what I'm having for lunch?
No. Oh. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to cook red meat, so it's not. But if you went out somewhere, you could order the Maverick.
Okay, I'll order it by name.
A steak, I presume. And then it will come with 2 collaborators for you as well. So those 2 collaborators, I think, would be a baked potato, but like a loaded baked potato, like a really good one.
Okay. Like really,
right? A really good, like sour cream, butter, cheese, chives, maybe some bacon bits on there, whatever you like, right? So a loaded baked potato and some creamed spinach, which is not to everyone's liking, but neither am I.
Okay. Well, dig on yourself at the end of the episode there.
It's part of my profile.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we want to thank you all for listening. If you haven't, please remember to subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. You can find us a lot of other places on the internet. You can certainly find these episodes posted on YouTube with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed in this episode, as well as links to all of our previous episodes. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, why not join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for $5 a month, you can get access to all of our episodes a week ahead of time, access to our voting on our quarterly book clubs and our quarterly listener choice episodes, as well as some free CEs for some of those episodes. And of course, you'll get access at the $10 premium level to our book clubs a year before anybody else. And you'll get 2 CEs for each of those book clubs, no additional charge, just as a thank you for being a subscriber. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Oh, wait, there's one more thing. You probably want the second secret code word, and it is Starlight. STARLIGHT. Such a beautiful code word. Go out tonight, take a look at the starlight.
Or it's those mints.
Or it's those mints? What mints are those?
Starlight mints. They're like peppermints.
Oh, I never heard of that.
Yeah.
That sounds good too. Have both. All right, some final big thanks. Big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, to Kyle Sturry for recording our interstitial music, and of course to Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!